The previous episode ended with Paris meeting Selena. In that moment, he felt happy and thought to himself, "She's just like family. It's okay. I'll talk to her." But the truth was, he was sitting in his room, feeling defeated and thinking to himself, "I was so carried away by the moment. Why did I say that?" Then, remembering his sister, he continued, "This is a disaster, and it's something we need to be very careful about now. I'm going to ask her out of my own free will now." And then he remembered how she felt embarrassed, and he said, "However, I couldn't refuse." But suddenly, in shock, he thought to himself, "No, wait." Then, imagining himself sleeping with Selena in the same bed, he happily thought, "Right. I guess I'll have to ask her to share a room at this point. And even when she's asleep, we should stay close to each other." He was only doing this to protect her from his evil sister, and he thought, "I have no other desires. In this way, I can definitely protect the little rabbit from the wicked witch." So he got up determinedly and said, "Oh yes, of course." And he went to her room and knocked on the door. When Selena opened the door and said, "Yes," Paris looked at her shyly, and his boldness immediately vanished. Selena was also embarrassed and said, "Oh my God." Then, nervously, she told Paris, "Hello, come in." And he went in, extremely shy, and said, "Excuse me." As he sat down, he tried to speak and said, "That..." At this point, Selena shyly asked him, Why did you come here?" And suddenly, when the maid, Anna, entered and said, "This is Anna," they looked at her in fear and tension, and silence fell for a moment. So Anna understood and told them, "I'll come back later." Then they looked at each other shyly and in silence. So Selena said with a gentle smile, "Would you like to sit down first?" And when they sat down, Paris said, "I asked Yart to send a message to my sister, asking her to come to the castle." So Selena happily said, "I was worried because she seemed dangerous, but it's no big deal." Then she asked him, "So when will she come?" And she thought to herself, "Is he worried that I might feel uncomfortable? He's so kind." At the same time, Paris was also thinking to himself, "It doesn't matter whether she's wearing that coat or not, but she clearly looks relaxed. She's nice." Then he replied to her and said, "I'm not sure if she'll come or not. We'll have to find out when Yart arrives." Then he looked at her with a serious face and said, "If my sister is going to stay in the inner city for a while, we'll have to share a bedroom for a while." Here, Selena, shyly and nervously, agreed without hesitation and said, "Yes." And Paris continued, "Senia is my sister, but she's been in the imperial family since her marriage, and she's the type who starts gossiping wherever she goes, and I don't think it would be good for her to see that we don't share a bedroom." Then the scene changes to Paris drying Selena's hair. Selena, feeling Paris's affection, thought to herself shyly, "Even though things like this have happened before, I have a strange feeling. I feel like night has fallen early today." At the same time, Paris was also feeling nervous and thought to himself, "Just a little." Then he held her hair shyly and continued thinking to himself, "I don't know how to do bad things, so I..." Suddenly, when Selena turned to him, she said shyly, "I feel ticklish." Paris was startled and quickly let go of her hair. Then, nervously, he said, "I'll be careful. Does it hurt?" Selena laughed at him, then lowered her head shyly and said, "No, not at all." Then she continued thinking to herself, "But I feel the sweetness and gentleness of your touch." Paris continued drying her hair, and she smiled, thinking to herself, "Forget the sad thing that just happened. My heart is fluttering for you again." Then Paris took Selena to his room and said, "I think the room is ready, so you can go in." And here Selena entered and said nervously, "Yes." Then she looked around the room and thought to herself, "I don't think much has changed. The wardrobe and dressing table have been moved." Then she remembered him drying her hair, and she put her hand over her mouth in embarrassment and said, "If we share this room, will Paris treat me the way he did before, as gently as when he was drying my hair?" She continued, thinking to herself lovingly, And if he's this gentle every night, I won't be able to resist my feelings. But suddenly, she nervously continued thinking to herself when she saw Paris hadn't entered the room. However, isn't Paris going to come into the room? Suddenly, she turned to him nervously when he said, I have some places I need to visit for a while, so you sleep first. So she looked at him in astonishment and said, What? But Paris quickly left and closed the door. Then, shyly, he started to sweat and thought to himself, I'm so nervous I can't be with you now. Then he left, saying, First, I need to meet her, referring to his sister, Selena. At that time, Selena was looking at the door in shock at Paris's reaction. Then she clenched her fists in anger and thought to herself, Is he going to keep being so indifferent? So she broke down crying and continued, What a rude and annoying man. Why did I fall in love with a man like him? Really? Is he going to keep going like this? So indifferent? At that time, Paris reached his sister's room and knocked on her door. She opened it and said, Come in. So Paris went in, and when he smelled a bad odor, he thought to himself, The herb has a bad smell. When he reached his sister, she asked him, What? Paris fell silent, nervous. So, with a magical intonation, she said to him, If I hadn't said anything, I wouldn't have known no matter what happened. So Paris said, The name is hereditary in our family, and my sister was with our parents more than I was. Have you heard anything before? She looked at him silently, then turned to him and said, Do you remember the story of the witch of Bilius and the Nephilim? Paris remembered when he was young and said to his sister, When we were little? Isn't that a fairy tale that Mom used to tell me before bed? Selena said to him, Yes. It's a story passed down like a founding myth. It says that when Lepidus Bilius, the first great man, came to the north for the first time, it is said that a witch and 2 Nephilim brothers were already living here. They were friendly with Lepidus, and the story says that the 4 of them soon became friends and laid the foundation for the north together. So she told Paris, The Nephilim are fundamentally different from the sorcerers who gathered the power of the ancient demon Crodon. They are a hybrid born between Crodon and a human woman. They are children who directly inherited Crodon's power. And thanks to the help of this divine being, we were invited into his family. Then she continued, After your first visit, I searched for everything related to that, but I couldn't find anything, as if someone had deliberately hidden it. But do you know? The average marriage age of the nobles in this country is between 24 and 28. It's very different from our family where people marry around the age of 18. Then she smiled at him and said, Isn't that strange? Paris said nervously, Yes. She continued, There's more backstory in the myths than in fairy tales. She began to tell him, Bilias's tragedy began when the witch fell in love with Lepidus. The witch, who had done nothing wrong to Lepidus, went mad with anger and betrayal when he married another woman, and only destruction remained in her path. But not all friends cursed Lepidus. The Nephilim, the noble elder brother, blessed the eternal love of the couple, and the Nephilim, the mischievous younger brother, was curious about the couple's first wedding night, but Lepidus caught him, and there was a commotion when he was reprimanded. And because he had no malicious intentions, he was forgiven, and to appease Lepidus, a spell was cast to increase his inner peace and stability. And fortunately, the spell of the younger Nephilim brother was said to have undone the curse of destruction that the witch had cast. She stood up and approached him, saying, That's why the heiress of our family has had a fiancé since she was about 10 years old. And as soon as the curse appeared, the ceremony was held. Then she stepped away from him and said, And after the first night passed, the curse disappeared without exception. Paris lowered his head in silence. She continued, The reason you had to travel around the battlefield is because you couldn't get rid of the curse and because our parents died very young. She closed her eyes and said angrily to herself, And when I found out all this, she thought for a moment and continued thinking to herself, I had already announced my retirement from the battlefield and said that you would marry immediately. And I didn't even contact you because I thought the curse would be lifted soon. Paris said nervously. Did you say that it was the beginning of marriage? She looked at him and said, specifically, it's the wedding and the first night. When Paris felt nervous, she understood that he hadn't done anything on the first night, so she said angrily, it can't be, not yet. Paris lowered his head and couldn't respond.